Good morning, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell phone to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Committee Chairman Sultan.
Due to the local state of emergency for the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun Water Board is meeting today by electronic means pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3708.2. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website. A recording of the meeting will be available at this link, www.loudounwater.org/virtual-meeting-recordings. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute and identify themselves by name so that staff can accurately capture comments. All items will be recommended to the February 10th, 2022 board meeting. The board secretary will now take a roll call attendance of the committee members.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sultan?
Here.
Mr. Bonfils?
Present.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Sursakar?
I'm here.
And I would also like to acknowledge that Mr. Byers, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Kobliss, and Mr. Allen and Mr. Kelly are all in attendance.
Okay, can we have a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
Yeah, this is Keith. I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right, roll call. Mr. Sultan?
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
And Ms. Sursakar?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the action item, which is the award of Community Systems Basic Ordering Agreements by Sarah.
All right. Good morning. I'm here this morning to request authorization to award some basic ordering agreements, our community systems BOAs, for professional engineering services. I'll talk a little bit about basic ordering agreements, the procurement process, and then talk about our selection process and end with a recommendation. So the committee has seen this before as we brought forward other BOA contracts. A basic ordering agreement, this is a primary contractual vehicle that we use to procure engineering services. So the basic ordering agreement itself lays out the terms and conditions of the contract, insurance requirements. This is where we've got payment provisions, right? All the requirements, the administrative requirements of the contract. And then we have individual task orders that we issue over the contract term. So as we identify a project and a need for professional services, we reach out to the BOA firm and we develop the scope of work, schedule, fee for that package of work. And collectively, the task orders and the basic ordering agreement become the full contract. We have a number of existing BOA contracts. So we have 3 different types. We have our civil BOAs. So those contracts we have with 4 firms. Typically that work is generally for things that fall more in kind of the land development arena, more linear infrastructure, land use approvals, things of that nature. Those contracts were executed in 2020. We have the environmental BOA contracts. That's for our more complex multidiscipline type work, pump stations, water booster station, work at our larger facilities. We have 5 firms that support us under that contract. Those were executed in 2021. Actually, I believe that we were here January of last year seeking authorization for those contracts. And then we have our community systems BOAs, and we have had a contract with 2 firms to support us in those efforts. Those contracts expired in 2021, and that's why we are here today. The community systems BOA contracts are generally the contract that we use to get support for our smaller water and wastewater treatment facilities. The nature of those services is different. We're talking about subsurface discharge treatment plants, groundwater well systems, safety audits. We also largely support our county water and wastewater program. So that's the program that we have in partnership with Loudoun County to address water and wastewater issues in the western communities within Loudoun County. So small systems, typically systems that serve less than 100 homes, we leverage this contract to support those needs. The previous community systems contract, over the course of the term, we issued 30 task orders, and the total value of that work was about $1.85 million. The nature and volume of work that is done under this contract is less than what we've seen on, say, our environmental BOA contract. In looking back at that one, that was in the order of 130 or so task orders over that 5-year term. So the procurement process is laid out for us under the Virginia Public Procurement Act. So selection for professional services has to be done following an RFP process to make a qualifications-based selection, where we are picking the firms that are best qualified to support us. There are also requirements in the Vpa and limitations for BOA contracts. So they are 1-year contracts, and we can renew them 4 times, such that the full contract term is 5 years. There's an annual limit for the max dollar value that can be delivered under one of these contracts. That's $8 million, and a single project limit is $2.5 million. For this particular procurement, we put out a request for proposal back in July of last year. We held a pre-proposal conference for interested firms, and proposals were submitted to us in September. The selection committee went through, reviewed those proposals, gathered and notified shortlisted firms about interviews. We had those interviews back in mid-November and made a selection and notified our selected firms on December 1 of last year. Now we're here in front of you requesting authorization to award the contracts. A little bit of detail about the RFP itself. The RFP was developed by the selection committee, so we had an 8-person selection committee. This group was involved the full duration of the procurement, and it represented people across various groups in the organization who will leverage this. So our remote facilities and community systems team, various groups within engineering, they provided input on the RFP and collectively identified the criteria that we wanted to use to select a firm. In the end, we received 6 proposals for this contract. From there, we shortlisted to 5 firms and interviewed them. Again, the selection committee was very engaged and involved in identifying things that we wanted to ask these firms to gauge and understand their fit, how well we thought they would be able to deliver to meet our needs. So we look at the CIP and we look to understand what are our needs in the next 5 years where we feel like we would want to leverage this contract and the skills that are made available to us through it to support our community systems. So that's really the bulk of what the interview was. Of course, there was introductions and an opportunity for the firms to put forward why they thought they were a good fit. But we really dug in the questions to understand if we thought collectively they were going to be able to meet our needs. So with that, we are bringing forward a recommendation to award contracts to Dewberry and Racy Engineering. They are the same firms that had contracts previously with us. So we're recommending award for 2022, and again, with the flexibility for us to renew in the future. I'm happy to take any questions, and otherwise there is a recommended motion before you. Ms. Ursicard?
Good morning. Yes, good morning, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Sarah, I had a question. So the selection committee, can you provide me a little bit more detail about them? What I mean by that is the selection committee, who are these people on the selection committee?
So it's all internal Loudon Water staff. So
Okay.
over the use of the contract, you know, there are lots of different groups within the organization who will have needs, right? It may be someone within operations and maintenance division who has a need to get access to one of these consultants to come out and look at an operational challenge. There may be within engineering, we need to actually design some improvement at one of these facilities. So the perspective that each of these different groups can bring, right? Operations and remote facilities, people within engineering who are on the planning side or the design side or construction, they are all able to collectively, when we bring that group together, we have a really broad perspective. So it's an internal team that we identify where we think that that group together will be able to make the best selection for the organization.
Okay, so there were no external entities involved here, just to
That's
confirm.
correct. Yeah, it's all internal.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sarah. That answers my question.
Sure. Mr. Moody?
Yes, good morning, Sarah. What asked, with the community systems BOA, can you speak upon any of the expected projects that you foresee would be falling under this BOA? Are you aware
Yeah.
of them?
Yeah, when we dug into the CIP, there are a number of, I mentioned the county water and wastewater program. So under that program, there are communities within parts of Loudon, Western Loudon, and we have a number of those projects ongoing, and they might sound familiar. Paonian Springs and Waterford and Unison. Those communities have come forward and asked through this program to have some assistance in understanding what the challenges are that they're feeling related to water and wastewater. So the first step in that process, that program, is to do a feasibility study. So under this contract, as we see future applicants come through, and we do expect them, we would leverage this contract to do a feasibility study to understand really and look at what are the problems within these communities, what are the potential range of solutions, and starting to lay out options as part of that program. That's one thing. There are also a number of other smaller improvements that need to be made at community systems. If we have upgrades to, for example, influent grinders, I think that's one that we did under the last contract. It's a relatively simple design. These plants are small, and so we find that the firms that we're leveraging under this contract are really well suited to the smaller systems. I don't know if that gives you enough examples. I can share some others if you feel like you need some more.
No, that's good. And I presume that with this BOA, there's a lower dollar threshold on what in terms of solicitation, what's put out for work or proposal responses?
The overall size of the projects does tend to be smaller in comparison to the larger vertical infrastructure projects that we do in our central service area. But we do feel like we have flexibility within the contract to do the work that we need to do. The limits of a BOA in itself, as I mentioned, $8 million in a year or $2.5 million in a single project, that is standard for all BOA contracts.
Okay, so it is similar in terms of dollar threshold. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Who were some of the other firms that submitted?
Other firms that submitted were Mott McDonald, Bowman, EA, which is a firm, they do a lot of more on the federal side. Who else was there? I don't know, somebody else from the committee on here might be able to come up with a few more. Bowman, I don't know if I said them.
No, that's good enough. I was just
Okay.
curious.
Yeah, give you a flavor.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, can I get a motion? Can I have somebody have a motion to move this recommendation?
Yeah, I'll make the motion, the recommended motion, and put it on, if it needs to go to the board, put it on the next board meeting on consent.
I agree, and I'll move this. Can we have a vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Sultan,
Yes?
Mr. Bonfils,
Yes?
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
and Ms. Sursakar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is construction market conditions. This should be very interesting.
Well, thank you. I hope we can live up to that. Good morning, everyone. We have a series of some informational items to share with you this morning, and this is the first one, is to talk a little bit about construction market conditions. I think we're all aware in our own sort of day-to-day of the variabilities that we're seeing in the current economy, inflation and supply issues, and how we're managing ourselves through that. And so this morning, we're going to talk about those similar issues, but we're going to switch the context and talk about it with Loudon Water construction projects. Certainly, there can be impacts on other areas of our business caused by similar issues, but today we're going to keep the focus here at the CIP meeting on construction projects for Loudon Water. You know, the uncertainty with the economy and the inflation has been here for a little while. We all have been experiencing it. So sort of, you know, you might ask, why bring this forward now? And I think the answer simply is because the impacts are increasing. And, you know, all along, we've been trying to keep abreast of how the market conditions are going, especially with respect to the work that we're doing, our ongoing projects and upcoming projects. We've been chatting with others, whether they're our neighbors, utilities, and the county, contractors, and engineers and suppliers, all of these to help build our perspective on what's going on. And today we're going to share some of that here with you. So we have a few different presenters that are going to help. I'm going to turn this over, and Sarah and Brian are going to kind of walk through this and share their overall perspective that they've been able to pull together and bring to you this morning. We'll talk a little bit about our current projects, and then also the ones that we have upcoming, and then just some next steps that we're taking sort of in response. And as always, if there's any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to chime in. And I think with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I'm playing Vanna White over here, and I realize that I'm pretty bad at it. So I'm going to jump right in and just hit a little bit on just project supply chain. As Tom mentioned, we're really trying to focus on projects here, the impacts to design and construction projects. So for our work that we're talking about, you know, there's lots of moving parts and pieces, components that get provided to manufacturers that go on to manufacturers' representatives who supply them to our contractors, who in turn provide those materials and labor to us in the form of projects. So we're going to, as we talk about some of the challenges and observations that we're seeing, it's across various parts of this supply chain. And I think that's just something to keep in mind. So I'll dig right into the market perspective and observations by starting off to talk about what projects we bid in 2021. So actually, it was at the very end of 2020, we bid the Howardsville project. That project came in under the engineer's estimate at the time. And so as we moved on over the course of the year, there were really, say, 4 projects in the last year that we bid. And it wasn't really until the most recent project, Reservoir Park, which we are going to talk about in detail, we were not seeing the low bid come in too far from our engineer's estimate. But we did see that, the spread in the bids was greater. So I think just to call your attention on the Sterling water valve replacements job, the highest bid there was more than twice the engineer's estimate. On the Trap Rock flow meter and sample line project, we actually had a pretty significant jump between our low bid and our other bids. We did, of course, do our due diligence on that project and feel comfortable that the contractor had an understanding of the work. But the impact to our budget was largely not felt until the most recent bid, even though we were, obviously monitoring things over the course of the past year. It's more recent now with an actual bid that is significantly different. So as Tom mentioned, Mr. Sultan, I see you have your hand raised.
What can you attribute on the Sterling water valve? Can you attribute that to any particular part of the contract that created such a big difference?
I can't specifically. Brian might be better suited for that one, since that project was run completely through the capital construction team.
Mr. Sultan, I think we were starting to see the real supply chain disruption at that time. But I think Madigan Construction was the low bidder for that project, and we have done a number of projects with them and have gotten used to them. So I think that the ease in which we've been able to communicate and work with them perhaps played into their lower bid amount. We don't have much experience with the other contractors included in that bid. So I would think that's I think supply chain could be part of it, but it's also just a familiarity with Loudon Water.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, thank you.
As Tom mentioned, we've gone to a lot of different places to really try to understand what's happening in the market. So I think that, we're looking at data that's provided from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I'll share some of that in a second, but also talking to a number of our peers, a number of our suppliers, manufacturers, representatives, contractors, and consultants to help us paint a picture for the market conditions. This is hot off the press, I guess you could say. This is the Engineering News Record cost indices. I think there's a lot of data here, and there's more to it, but I want to highlight a few things. This is data that was just published this week, and I think overall, a couple things. The materials cost index, this is a monthly increase of inflation, so a 2.2% increase in pricing for materials in the past month. As we've looked back at this, the numbers for December were about 1.8%. And I think the key thing here is the compounded impact over the past year. So you see some materials. These are inputs common to a lot of our Loudon Water projects. So lumber has had an almost 27% increase in cost over the past year. Steel at over 40%. The other piece over here that I want to call your attention to is on the annual inflation rate, the CCI, construction cost index. And you can see that it shows a common labor here for the years increased 1.4%. They dig in as well to understand skilled labor, and skilled labor is something, as we start talking about disciplines work as inputs on our project, right? Having skilled electricians and other trades of that nature, that actually increased at an even higher rate, around 2.6%. This here shows some of the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. This is a 2-year graph that shows data for the past 2 years, and it's indexed. So this number here is an index relative to 100, which was they started indexing against a price from like 1981. But I think that the key takeaways here, again, are just, the general upward trend and also the volatility on some of these materials. So we've highlighted some materials that are common to our projects: ductile iron pipe, plastic, PVC pipe, fuel, which is a component of every project, as we have equipment, bypass pumping that are diesel pumps, and different heavy equipment that's used in the construction course of construction. And all of these are generally trending upward and have some pretty, in some cases, some drastic swings, like in the case of plywood. I think we generally see the same trend in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for labor. And so this is, again, you can see pretty stark increase from kind of September through the end of last year, but a large kind of upward trend in that. I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about what some of our peers are seeing and saying. We do participate in a number of groups that share and have conversations around supply chain. So the next three of these slides highlight some of the information that was shared. This was shared by HRSD. They are the Hampton Roads Sanitation District down in the Virginia Beach area, a large regional utility. And what they conveyed, and this was back in October, is that they were seeing significant long lead times on manufactured goods. So things that were really impacting on the project side, impacting schedules. They were also seeing labor shortages and just general price increases across all sectors. Beckley Sanitary Board, this is out in West Virginia, they conveyed that they were also seeing material supply shortages, price increases. They shared a specific example of a local school project that came in. The low bid was 50% above the estimate, and that was several months ago. And our friends in North Myrtle Beach shared, a project that they bid back in May, and there was a pretty significant difference in what their estimate was for the project and the low bid, $12.5 million versus $19.5 million. And that was for a large pipe project. Some of the things, once they dug into it with the contractor, was that there was a lot of risk that was priced into the job based on uncertainty around the ability to get labor and labor rates that they would have to pay, and costs around fuel. They also were concerned around the ability to deliver, to procure and get pipe delivered on time because of the steel, the steel shortages. We did also have conversations with Fairfax Water. They were in a similar position to us in that they didn't bid a ton of work in 2021, so they didn't realize those impacts, not dissimilar from us. They did bid a project at the end of last year, and they did see pretty significant differences, with the low bid being 30%. Bids ranged from 130% to 186% compared to the estimate. So the low bid was still significantly higher than the estimate, and then that difference just grew as they looked at the other bids. They are experiencing excessive lead times for ductile iron pipe. They actually, as part of their water main replacement project, or program, I should say, they directly procure fittings and pipe and then supply that to contractors for replacement. And they are seeing that their ability to do work as part of that program is being impacted because they can't actually get the pipe on time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and he's going to talk about some of his observations.
Thank you, Sarah. And good morning, board and committee. So I called several of our local vendors and supply shops that we work with quite a bit for the common materials that we use in our industry, from pipe all the way to manholes and even pumps and that sort of equipment. And I put together this table with information about the lead times for these materials. Certainly from this table, the biggest lead time differences are coming in the pipe industry from ductile iron pipe and PVC sewer pipe as well. Those increases are for ductile iron pipe, almost a 5-fold increase in the time that we would normally would have gotten in 2020, in late 2020, between late 2020 and late 2021. So it went from 6 weeks to 32 weeks for ductile iron, and then the fittings were similar. Some of the fittings are actually made in China, and that's taking time as well. Precast manholes didn't change much, but I'll cover the cost increase to those in just a minute. Any questions? Okay. Okay, so this is a material price increase. You can see from the ductile iron pipe, we've seen a 44% increase in pipe for the ductile iron, and then the fittings a 71% increase. The sewer itself, the PVC sewer, has more than doubled.
Brian, Mr. Sultan has a question.
Okay, Mr. Sultan.
Since these changes occur, I guess, almost monthly, how does the contract take advantage of this? In other words, if a guy bids a certain time schedule and can't meet it, or bids a certain price schedule and can't meet it, what are we doing in the contract to take care of this, if anything?
Okay, well, let me talk first about what we have now, because our contract at present, most of our contracts are bid lump sum. So the contractor would assume the risk if for price increases. And a year ago, supply shops could guarantee a certain delivery time for these, and that they won't do that anymore. They're only providing short delivery times, and then even setting their price for 30 days or 60 days, much less than they would have in the past. So at the present time, we're looking at some ways to address this in our contract documents, including perhaps an escalation clause. We haven't gotten much into that yet because we're still reviewing some language that we could possibly include that might take some of the risk off of the contractor. Of course, that we would be absorbing that risk, and we would see that perhaps in the form of more changes to the contract. But it's one way that we can address that is through an escalation clause. And then in terms of time, in terms of contract time, we will increase the contract time over what we would have done a year ago. We can certainly include that. Koblis?
All right.
Yeah, Brian, thanks. Obviously, escalation clauses are an extreme slippery slope for us as an owner. And, you know, we don't have control over who they're purchasing from. So it's an extreme slippery slope. Second question, maybe you're going to get to it in your slides. But have you talked to any of these contractors on, you know, how long it will take for this to correct itself? And, you know, except for extreme emergency projects that we just kick the can down the road. What is their, you know, what is their discussion? Do they think this is going to be 6 months out, a year out, never? I can't believe it's never, but anyway.
Right. Okay. Well, I have, well, if there are no more questions on this slide, we'll get to the next slide, because I have spoken to some of the contractors locally.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, go ahead, Sarah. Okay, so I spoke to the contractors included here, and across the board, they're seeing supply chain delays and increased costs themselves. The contractors themselves cannot predict when the supply chain issues will resolve themselves. I think with, you know, there's some other things in play here as well with the Federal Reserve looking at increasing interest rates that could slow this inflation that we're starting to see in the pricing, and that could decrease the demand, which could bring those disruption chain more in order with what we've normally seen in the past. But in terms of predicting, we can't predict that right now.
And don't know, Brian, if I can also add to that, as part of these conversations, they've talked about kind of the inflation slowing, but a lot of these other factors within the supply chain, the compounding impact of, labor shortages, and therefore, rates that they're going to have to pay people. But also there's some other things out there, and Tom's going to talk a little bit about what we plan and are proposing that we bring back to you guys. But there's also the infrastructure spending bill that's out there. And that's been something that's repeatedly come up with contractors is, as they're laying out what that's going to look like, there's timelines for the spending of that money. And so there is an expectation that there is going to be more demand placed in the market. So while you may see inflation slow, the general feeling is that we're not going to see prices go back to what they were pre-pandemic.
Okay. And Mr. Koblis, I'll add that you're absolutely correct that the escalation clause would be a slippery slope. We're also looking at perhaps more unit price bids as well that would decrease the risk that the contractors are seeing. So we're viewing a lot of options here. Any other questions? Okay, let's go. Okay, so at present we have 6 projects under construction. We have seen little to no market-related cost impacts to Loudon Water, although but we do anticipate some market-related schedule impacts to Loudon Water. And Mr. Sultan, you asked earlier about the Sterling valve project. And I mentioned that Madigan was performing that work and they have some familiarity with us. Well, Madigan actually performed the phase 2 contract for us. So they actually had some information in their estimating side about how much that work cost them, so they would better know how much the phase 3 work would cost as well, so that they could develop a more competitive number. So I didn't mention it quite in that way when I spoke earlier about that. In terms of recently completed construction contracts, I will cover these later in my construction report. We completed 2 projects totaling $7.4 million. Both of those were pump station projects. We had no market-related cost impacts to Loudon Water. The total change orders were up just a bit at 4%. Normally we see 2 to 2.5%, and we had no market-related schedule impacts to Loudon Water because those contracts were awarded a few years ago. Mr. Sultan?
I'm going back a little bit, but I noticed you have some fittings that come from China. A
Yes.
number of years ago, we had trouble with fittings, quality control on fittings that came from India. What kind of quality control is there on fittings coming from China?
Well, in fact, some of the fittings could come from India as well. India has its some casting, like manhole covers are often cast over in India. I haven't heard of quality issues with the fittings coming from China, and I really don't know what sort of quality control are placed on imported items like that. I'll be glad to check into that as well. But those are fabricated for the U.S. manufacturers, including American Pipe and U.S. Pipe and McWane Pipe. So it would be delivered to them, and I would imagine they put that under some sort of testing to ensure the quality if it's going to have their name on it. But that's the best I can tell you on that. I'll be glad to check into that more.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brian. And first of all, I just realized and apologize that apparently at the beginning of the presentation, I had forgot to turn my camera on. So my apologies for that. So switching to what projects do we have coming up? This is kind of just a look forward to what we have planned to bid here in 2022. As Sarah showed and mentioned that we had kind of a light bidding year in 2021. And so here early in the year, in the first quarter, we don't have any projects planned to go out to bid. And in the second quarter, we have a few projects listed here. 2 of those projects, the first 2 are piping projects. And then that third project, the Raspberry Selma one, is some upgrades within the water treatment plant there that's currently under design. So these projects are currently underway in the design phase, and based on how those projects are progressing, we had anticipated them going out to bid in the second quarter. The pricing that you see that's associated with this is just simply the cost that is right now represented in our capital spending plan that was approved by the board at the end of the year. And then you can see we have a few other projects kind of scheduled for later in the year in the third quarter. A couple more projects that are not really what we would consider big dollar items under $1 million. And in the fourth quarter, we do have a pump station project, Russell Branch, and also the Broad Run Farms water main, although that project have a little bit of a different sort of twist to it. It is a county funded project. So when we think about the risks of cost and schedule, of course, that would be something that we would have to discuss and coordinate with the county on what their sort of tolerance is there for funding that project if it were to go forward. So just a quick look forward as to where we are. Some things here that again in the sort of tail end of the first half of the year that we're planning to put out to bid. And you know, we are continuing to try to understand what and observe what the market looks like, especially with respect to the types of materials that would be incorporated and included in these projects. These piping projects, things like sort of general steel costs and lumber should not have as big of an impact on the pricing or schedule for those projects, of course. But as Brian and Sarah both mentioned, you know, where the piping costs are up and delivery is slow on those, then those may have an impact on those projects. So that's just a quick look. We'll talk here a little bit on the next slide just about some next steps, and they tie into those projects as well. So the next steps for us here, continue to build our understanding, kind of keep it as up to date as we can on what the market is doing, similar to showing you some of the information that we've been developing here, understanding, you know, where material pricing is going, how delivery times are shifting, you know, specifically to the projects that we have coming out to bid. And then, you know, if there are any things that we can do to perhaps adjust those projects, which could include, you know, trying to identify the drivers for those projects. I shouldn't say trying to identify, but reviewing the drivers for those projects and really understanding how urgent the need is for those projects and matching that up along with what we think sort of some of the impacts are. If there's a reason to think that delaying the project might be a better path forward, then that's something that we would certainly look at doing. There was and this is something that we do all the time, and there's a small example of this that, and you may recall late in the year last year, and Sarah had it on her list, that there was a project that came forward to the committee, and it was for a meter replacement out at Trap Rock. Well, it wasn't a very big dollar item for that project. I think the whole project bid at around $250,000. But it had been identified by the team in the design phase that schedule was critical because the project was going to require a portion of the treatment plant to be taken offline. And the preference would be to do that in the wintertime and not have it done in the summer when the plant is being relied on more and more because of the increase in demands. And the team had identified that the flow meter was a very long lead item based on sort of the current delivery schedules, and to accommodate the overall bidding and the construction project, we went out and purchased that meter so that we could not only lock down the price but get a better schedule on it. So when the project was put out to bid, that piece of equipment was basically identified to be an owner furnished piece of equipment. Now, we've done that in the past and there are risks associated with doing that, but it seemed like the best path forward to get that project moving. So we do have some other ways to try to see if we can adjust how we compensate, if you will, for some of these project impacts. So those are sort of some things we can do in the near term. on the overall capital spending plan that was brought forward, we're going to reassess all of the projects that are in that capital spending plan, confirm the drivers, confirm the types of materials in those projects, what the schedules are, what the needs for those projects are, and try to identify projects that are good candidates for adjustments if they're needed. And we'll do that. And if there is a desire, if there's a need to cut on some of the spending for the year, we'll have identified the projects that are most sort of the best candidates for us to do that. And we'll do a similar activity then for the overall sort of, I guess, first 5 years of the CIP, and match that up with work that Brian Carnes in the finance department will be doing with the 5-year plan of finance. And again, identifying projects that we think represent opportunities where we might be able to make some adjustments to better handle some of these impacts in the market.
Tom, Mr. Koblis, and then Mr. Sultan have questions.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
So, hey, Tom, I just want to echo what you were saying about pre-purchasing equipment. That is a very effective way to combat inflation, et cetera. And the only risk is if you buy the wrong item. 99% of the contractors will, you can assign the warranties, et cetera, that come with the piece of equipment that you bought, and they gladly accept it, especially if they want to do the project. During the data center boom of 2008, 2009, or not just internet boom, not data center, we did that all the time for generators and floors, et cetera. So it's very effective, and it's a good way to do things. Just commenting.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on something. The idea of holding back some projects until the prices go down won't work, because a lot of other people will be doing it, and the pent-up demand will end up holding prices high. So I think the idea of holding back till prices go down probably won't work. Just a comment.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Jewel. Yeah, just follow up on Mark's question, Tom. You may have touched upon this, but I agree with Mark. I think that's a very effective strategy to fight inflation. But when does the warranty start? Do you lose by pre-purchasing like that? Some time in advance, do you lose any of your warranty?
Probably Brian or Sarah is probably better suited to answer that. But I do believe that there are things that we can do purchase a longer warranty if that was the case, if we thought we might be having the material on hand longer than it was ready to be installed, and still get a 1-year warranty from the contractor. But Sarah and Brian, I don't know if there's anything more to add to that.
Yeah, we can specify that. We can specify a longer warranty, or the start date for the warranty being when the contractor has achieved substantial completion of the work. I will add one thing. There's another risk to the owner furnishing equipment, and that is if the equipment is delayed in getting to the site and we delay the contractor, those delays would not fall under a no damages for delay provision in our contract, and those could be compensable delays. So there could be increased risk of costs there.
Mr. Koblis?
Yeah, Sean, we never had an issue on.
Mr. Koblis, I'm sorry, you are muted.
Yeah, rookie mistake.
Thank you.
Yeah, we never had a problem with warranties, because you can purchase it with the warranty that it starts when installed, and a lot of times we wouldn't even receive the product. The manufacturer would keep the product on site, and it was not affected. I think that's a low risk item. What Brian was talking about is another risk, but that's something that we would know, and we could put that on the manufacturer too.
Okay, thanks.
So if there's no more questions, then then I think that wraps up the item.
Mr. Sultan, I was going to see if maybe I could throw a wrench into your agenda. And I know we have some members that have some hard stops, and I would suggest, with your approval, that we go into our closed meeting now, and then we can come back into this public session to go over the reports if the committee desires to do so. And Jonathan will fill you in on all the specifics of how that could work.
Sounds good to me.
Yes,
Do you need to change the agenda?
we could either do a motion to change the agenda, or if there's no objection from the members of the committee, I think the chairman can just by unanimous consent make that alteration.
Without objection on my part.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, we can make that change.
And I think Jewel may speak to the technological issues, but I think we all just need, those who are participating in the closed meeting need to exit this Teams meeting and then join the closed meeting invitation that you were sent separately.
Do we need to have a separate? Do we need to have a separate motion to enter into the closed session?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's an excellent point. Yep.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to enter into closed session?
I make a motion that we enter closed session. This is Jim.
I second.
Thank you. And a vote on that, Mr. Sultan,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Ms. Sursakar.
Yes.
Thank you. If you would please leave this meeting.
Sorry,
And
Jewel. I just wanted, for
Sure.
the purposes of the recording, the motion, I assume, was as stated in the agenda for the purposes that are listed in the agenda.
Yes.
that is
that's
correct.
fine.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if you will leave this meeting, go to your calendar and open the closed meeting invite and enter the closed meeting that way. Thank you.
Thank you. In a second.
Jewel, do we have all of the committee members back now?
Apparently we don't have Jewel.
Okay. All right.
We need her.
Sorry, technical difficulties there for a second.
No problem. I think the next item that we should do is to have a motion to certify that the items discussed in the closed session were those that were specified in the motion to go into closed session. So, and then a vote
I
on it.
make that motion.
I second
This
it.
is Angeline. Yeah, I'll second it too. I mean, yeah.
All right, and a vote, Mr. Sultan,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
and Ms. Sursakar.
Yes.
Very good, certified.
Jonathan,
Now-
do you have to state something?
I was just going to say, I think we now can return to the agenda where we had left it off.
Yeah, actually, it is 200K.
Well, it looks
It
looks like that
Yes,
was the
please.
last item. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So I'm sorry, Mr. Sultan. I think there were some other items that we skipped over.
Did we?
when we-
Yes. Yes, if you look at the agenda, we were on item C, I think, of the informational items.
So the
I don't
agenda's
have-
not showing up. You
The
need to
window's
move up
not
to,
showing it up,
yeah.
yeah.
Is that
right
better?
now no. Right now you're showing what's on next month's CIP agenda tentatively.
Hold on one
There
second,
was-
Michael.
Brian's quarterly. There you go.
Can you see
There
it?
we
Okay,
go.
very good. Sorry,
Yes.
thank you.
Oops, now it's. I guess it's the capital construction report. Although I can't see the agenda.
Okay.
Brian?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning again. So I'm here to present the fourth quarter capital construction report. Just taking a second for the control here. Okay. All right. In my report today, I'll be discussing the three projects that are listed here. The Howardsville project, Sterling Valve Replacements Phase 3. We discussed that a little bit earlier. Broad Run expansion, and then I'll present the quarterly numbers at the end. Okay, the Howardsville Wastewater Collection System project. And if Mr. Moody is still on the call here, he asked earlier about the community systems BOA that we use here. And this that community systems BOA was used for this project. Dewberry did the design work for this project and prepared the construction documents. So this is just an example of the type of project that for which we would use the community systems BOA. Okay, this is entirely funded by the county, is to provide sewer service to the community. Sagres is our contractor. We've completed $816,000 worth of work since beginning the project last year. In fact, most of the work is done. The sewer itself is installed complete. The lateral connections are all completed. The wells drilled. The access road is completed. We have work left with the control panels and the electrical and installing the grinder pumps and just a little bit of change order work as well. You have any questions on this slide? Okay, I've got just a couple photos from the project. This project is low pressure sewer, and it's all 1.5 and 2 inch PVC pipe for the entire project. So that's what you see on the left is some of the sewer that's installed, low pressure sewer, and some valves along the way. The photograph on the right is a grinder pump vault. That's also a PVC type structure. That's been placed as well at the properties, although the pumps have not been installed yet. And of course, the electrical work is not complete. Any questions? Sterling Valve Replacement Phase 3. This is to provide better isolation of our water system for operation and maintenance, and will allow us to go in the future and replace the water line in its totality there. Madigan Construction, I mentioned earlier, they are the contractor for the project. All of the valves have been installed complete. Those are, and we call those clusters, and I'll show you that on the next slide. We have about 12 different valve clusters, all of which are along Lincoln Avenue and Sugarland Run in the project, and those are all installed complete. Those were done last month and put into operation. I'm having trouble advancing here. Okay. The valve clusters that I described earlier, those were installed or assembled above grade, and that's what you see on the left there. You've got a cross with 4 valves, a valve on each leg of that cross, and then after it's assembled, it would be lowered down into the excavation that you see on the right. And these are just 2 more photographs of the installation. Photograph on the right, of course, is after it's backfilled with stone. We backfill the entire excavation with stone up to the subgrade, and the only work that's remaining on the project is final paving and release from VDOT. These are all, and I'll close and say, these are all standard size valves, 8 and 12 inch. Okay, the Broad Run expansion, which takes us from 10 to 15 million gallons per day. Our contractor is Kokosing Industrial. They were formerly known as Corman Kokosing Construction through the end of last year, but they went through a reorganization and a name change. So we know them as Kokosing Industrial now. And we, of course, completed all the paperwork to recognize that change. The project is about 40% of the time has elapsed, and we've spent roughly 42% of the contract price, so that's at least the value of the work. Our change order total is about 1.3 million for the project, and it's so the new contract value now is at 77.2 million. I've got an aerial photo that was taken by drone just a couple of weeks ago. This is at our preliminary and primary treatment facility, which is right next to Loudoun County Parkway that you see on the left. So you can see this construction from the parkway. I wanted to show you a couple photos of some of the equipment we're getting. This is our 4th emergency generator. We had 3 existing, so we added a 4th. This particular generator has a 2 megawatt capacity, and the engine is a little under 3,000 horsepower. It's a diesel generator. Any questions? Okay.
Brian, Ms. Ursakar has a question.
Go ahead. Yes.
Brian, yeah. So with that generator previously on that slide, you don't need to go back to the slide. I just had a quick question.
Okay.
I just wanted to know, in terms of the maintenance of that generator, who takes care of that?
We'll take care of that generator, and if we need a service contract with the generator manufacturer, we can secure that.
Okay.
We do have it. We do have it under a warranty provided with the generator. Yes.
Okay. And what's the, how long is the average warranty for? Like 3 years, 5 years, I think it is.
I'm not sure if there's a specific warranty called for in the specifications for the generator. Our standard warranty under our general conditions is 1 year past substantial completion.
Just 1 year?
Well, that's our standard warranty in our general conditions. Now, there may be something more stringent than that or longer than that within our specifications for the generator. I just don't know that at the present, and I can I've got Rick Zafel. I think he is on the call. If he knows that information, he can chime in now about the generator.
You can send that to me in the essence of time. I think here, do send that information. I was really interested to know that, because the reason why I asked that is because you would understand there's additional cost attached to that, and then it's a good thing to know about these things because we come in these meetings.
Right.
So that's why I was asking. But thank you, Brian.
Sure. Sometimes we include longer warranties for certain items, like roofing, for instance. We often have a 20-year warranty that's provided by the manufacturer for a roofing system that gets conveyed to us at the end of the project. And that would certainly subsume any 1 year warranty that the contractor would provide himself.
Right,
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, this is just a photograph of one of the new pumps that we just recently installed on the project. The new pumps are much larger than the existing ones. So we had 6 existing pumps. We took 3 of those out and put in the 3 new replacements. These are much larger pumps. They're 280 horsepower pumps, and the existing ones are 125 horsepower. And I've got the flow rates provided for each of those shown as well. So the existing pumps that we took out, those are salvaged now, and we will use those for parts for the 3 that are remaining that are of that same size. Mr. Sultan? You're on mute, sir.
Just a curiosity question. How much of this equipment is American made and how much comes from China or out of the country?
Wow, it's kind of a mixed bag. These are flight pumps, which come from Europe. So these are a European-made pump. Most of our equipment, gosh, I'm afraid to say, I'm sure we're getting some that's imported from Asia as well. But I simply don't know that right off.
Okay, so that's okay. I was just curious.
Any other questions? I want to provide a little bit of data about our construction administration. So far, we've received 985 submittals and shop drawings through last year, and we've gotten 234 requests for clarification. And Mr. Sultan and Mr. Kovas, I thought this information might be meaningful for you, because you're obviously in the industry, so you would be familiar with this. And then I also want to provide some information about the concrete that was placed in 2021. A little over 12,000 cubic yards of concrete. Our estimate for the entire project is 16,000 cubic yards of concrete. So we're more than 3/4 complete with the concrete for the project. Any questions? We talked a little bit about risk earlier, and I mentioned ductile iron pipe and specifically and the fittings where we're seeing some delays. We have seen some delays in HVAC equipment, and the delays that we're seeing in the pipe and in this HVAC equipment, which has some stainless steel components that make it the delay or the delivery a little bit longer. It has delayed some milestones, some intermediate milestones, but it has not delayed the overall project delivery yet. Okay, so I want to make that clear. Of note, we have no cost impact to us for this because we have a no damages for delay contract provision. So our cost is set there, and the delays themselves, the cost of that delay would be to the contractor. That's part of the risk that they absorb. The contractor locked in the materials cost early because we've been in construction now for almost a year and a half. So they've locked in their prices early. But the materials availability and delivery is driving the schedule. So as they get pipe onto the site, they are determining where they can go next to do their work. So they're not strictly following the schedule as they would in an ideal manner of how the schedule would normally be built, but the materials delivery is driving the schedule. And they're being flexible in how they execute the work. Any questions? So the key takeaways, the communication between the parties, I would say is still strong. It's all green checks here for this. Quality's been good. Projected completion, we're still within the contract time. Change orders, I'll say that we're up to 7 change orders now, totaling $1.3 million. These are the numbers for our existing construction projects. We have 6 projects in construction. I've got 2 of those highlighted, the Cortland Permanent Pump Station and the Sterling Valve Project. Those were both declared substantially complete in December. So we expect to complete those here within the next month or so. And then you can see the numbers off to the right there in terms of percent complete and percent spent for those. At present, we're at 1.7% for change orders. Any questions? We issued the notice of final completion for 2 projects last quarter, the Brambleton Permanent Pump Station and the Cedar Crest pump station upgrades. That would be 2 pump stations, Cedar Crest 1 and 2. So we achieved final completion on those last quarter. Any questions? Okay, that completes the presentation, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chair, I know that we're kind of running long, so I'll just kind of keep my comments real brief, and then if there's any questions, I can answer those. This is the just the look at spending through the fourth quarter, or I guess through the end of December. The final numbers here are not update yet, as finance is still working to take the final billings, some of them which have been come in January that still are for work in December and have been charged back. Will be charged back, I'm sorry, once they complete sort of that assessment. So if there's any questions on this, I can go ahead and take them. Okay. The last item here is the annual work plan for the CIP committee. This is a requirement in your committee charters that we put together an annual work plan. So we do this every January and present this to you. It is our vision of basically the scheduling of work that we have and what we anticipate bringing forward to the committee. I don't feel the need that we need to review all these, but I'll just mention in here, you see there's a combination of contracts for construction that we believe the timing of when those will be coming forward, some awards for professional services, for task orders, informational items also on here scheduled. And it's a plan, and we try to track these as best as we can, but it is a look forward for you. So if there's any questions, either now or once you take a look at it, I'd be happy to follow up.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Sultan, sir, you're muted.
Since we're running, I do have one question, but I'll contact you, Tom, when after the meeting, because I don't want to keep it going.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Sosakar, I heard from my staff just a minute ago that our generator warranty is for 2 years beyond the date of substantial completion.
I thought so. That is a good answer. Thank you. I appreciate it, Brian. Thank you.
Sultan, the last item is to adjourn the meeting, sir.
Well, I motion that we adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
This is Angeline. I'll second that.
I have Ms. Sosakar as a second. And with no other questions, I'll go ahead and take the vote. Mr. Sultan?
Yes, and thanks everybody for sticking through this whole meeting. It was a long one.
Mr. Bonfils?
Yes, and thanks everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Yes.
And Ms. Sosakar?
Yes.
Thank you. Adjourned at 10:21 a.m.
All right, everyone have a good day.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. Have a
everyone.
good day. Bye.